So now we're going to get ready for our piston installation. So last thing I'm going to have to do is I got some new rod bearings, and these are the factory replacement rod bearings, so I know they're going to be the exact right size. So I'm just going to install these all into the caps and the rods themselves. They're pretty much just slide in really nicely and tight and hold position. And then before I actually put the pistons into the engine, I'm going to put just a little bit of oil on the bearing surfaces. I'm not going to use any of the assembly lube just because this thing's going to be started up very quickly. The assembly lube is more for if your vehicle is going to be sitting for, or the engine is going to be sitting for a while before it's actually started, so it doesn't actually lose the oil. And then you're not starting it dry, but since this is going to be started pretty darn quickly after I get this assembled, I'm not too worried about it. So something I was mentioning earlier is that these are fractured rods, and as you can see, it's not like a machined smooth surface. So pretty much what they do is, this is a cast rod, and once it's been cast and everything, they take it and they break it, so pretty much only one cap will only ever fit one rod. So if you lose a rod or a cap and damage a cap, there's no way to fix it. You just gotta get a new rod. So as you can see, the crack pretty much disappears, and it's not like it's a straight line crack or anything like that, and it's, you know, it's not an even break, but supposedly it's supposed to be stronger. I'm just gonna put a small amount of oil in there. Pretty much just gonna coat the whole surface. Alright, now all we gotta do is compress the piston rings and put them in. Alright, we're back over here by the engine so we can install the pistons. So I am going to be using the generic piston ring compression tool. Definitely not my favorite tool to use, but I don't have one of the tapered tools. So gotta work with what you got sometimes. So pretty much you just want to put this thing just past the rings, start tightening it up. I forego, it comes with like a little square cut, essentially Allen key looking thing. It's a lot easier to just use a 1/4 inch ratchet with an extension, because the extension is actually the exact same size of what the key they give you is. And just go, keep going until you can't really get it any tighter. Done with that guy. And there actually is a direction for which all these pistons go. For these, there's a small arrow. You can't really see it because my piston's dirty, but the arrow will point forward, which is towards the timing chain. Or if you kept the rods on the pistons, you need to keep them in the correct orientation anyway, but the bearing locks go towards the back of the motor. So as you're installing it, if these locks aren't towards the back, you either got the rod on backwards or the pistons is on backwards. So pretty much we're just gonna slip it in. The reason we need the skirts down is because it's gonna start us into our cylinder. So we just start it in, grab a hammer. I like to use a brass hammer if I got it. We're just gonna seat the ring compressor to the block and then use the butt of the hammer to slide the piston down. Pretty much just gentle taps. And if you work front to back on the pistons, it usually helps get the rings in there easier. So now that we got the pistons in, we can actually start doing some of the modifications that we're gonna have to do the turbocharger installation, which actually is gonna be to switch out my thermostat housing and the water pump outlet tube. So those all came with the kit that I got. So it's pretty much just a simple, take all of this off, put it in. I'm just doing it now because I don't have a cylinder head in my way, so it makes things really convenient. So I'm gonna start off by taking and disconnecting my engine coolant temperature sensor that happens to be in the back, and then removing it because I gotta get these, there's 3 10mm bolts that are holding it together, and then that should just pop off and then I can slide it all out, because there's nothing that actually holds this pipe into place except for just being squished between the water pump and outlet. Out. You Just remove these two coolant pipes. I'm just going to take all this apart. Oh, there's the coolant, of course. Alright, so I got the new thermostat housing here. You'll notice that I'm actually running a loop heater core. That's once again because I'm not, these are the heater core hoses. I'm not running a heater core on this vehicle, so therefore I gotta loop it. And I can't just plug it because I mean I probably could just plug it, but looping is a lot easier. So it just slides in like that. Just put the 10 millimeter bolts back in it, and then put our we actually got a new engine coolant temperature sensor too that came with this kit. All right, and I think we're pretty much ready for cylinder head installation. All right, we're back over here. We're gonna be working with a cylinder head. We got a couple things we're gonna do. Obviously, clean the gasket surface. Remove this really cheap exhaust manifold that I beat the crap out of to get fit on, because apparently I can't buy the right one. Then we're gonna put this on there, and we're also, before we do that, we're gonna check for flatness, just like we did on this the block. So let's get started. All right, and now it's the same as the block, where we're just gonna use a razor blade with light pressure and just get the majority of everything, I mean pretty much everything off. It's once again pretty easy. Still want to be very careful not to gouge the aluminum cylinder head, because once you gouge it, you're pretty much screwed. All right, and that should pretty much do it. Give it a little wipe. Once again, using microfiber towel. Make sure it's nice and clean. Let's check flatness. This time we're back to checking flatness on the cylinder head, but instead of 0.002 inches, we're working with 0.004. So we got our feeler gauges back out. We're going to do longitudinal and transverse flatness checks. So once again, we're going to put it flat on the cylinder head. Just pretty much hold it still. Check to see if it goes under, and all the spots where the straight edge meets, and we got nothing. Still nothing. Let's see if we can get a smaller measurement under there. We'll try the 0.002. Nothing. I'd say we're perfectly flat. Alright, the last thing I'm going to do here is put the exhaust manifold on it, just because it's easier and I'm kind of lazy, which works out perfect. So yeah, just got a new gasket. Guess we should probably clean this up a little bit too. Put our gasket on here. Pretty much only goes one way, so you can't really screw it up. Exhaust manifold on, also one way. So we're finally getting back into reinstalling the head. We got a new head gasket. Pretty much just goes on straight with the alignment studs. Already cleaned up the surface, got the head mating surface cleaned up. So just put this thing on here. Make sure it goes on nice and flat. And then we'll just plop the cylinder head back on it. So now we're on those alignment pins, and I finally get to use something that I don't get to use very often, which is head studs. Since we're going to be on a boost, I decided to go with some of these ARP head studs just because they hold a lot tighter. It's pretty straightforward installation. We're just going to put these in all of where the head bolts used to go, and we're just going to seat them. You don't have to go very hard when you're first seating them. It's pretty much just until it stops going. And then what's actually going to be torquing the head down is when we put the nuts on top of these. Alright, so now we can get on to installing the ARP nuts and washers. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put some of the ARP fastener lubricant on both of these components. So pretty much there'll be zero coefficient of friction here, so we can get an actual torque when we actually put it down. Alright, so now we're going to get on to torquing the cylinder head down. Especially with this head stud, it's a lot easier. You don't have to do any torque to yields. So pretty much we've got a sequence of 3 going in pretty much a spiral around the clock on this thing. And we're starting at 40 foot-pounds, going to go 60, then 80, which is actually considerably more than what the factory ones have. Alright, here we are on day 3 of my build. Pretty much we're just going to try to assemble everything that we took apart the last few days, drill that one hole in the oil pan, and then get to mounting the turbocharger and all the other lines and everything required to make this thing run. So we're back underneath in the timing chain area, and what we need to do before we can get to putting the actual timing chain on is put the balance shaft chain on. As you can see, there's some colored links. This one's actually for the right balance chain. This is for the left balance chain, and this is for the crankshaft. And it's pretty simple. On each of the gears, you got a mark. So this would be the crankshaft mark. You got one here on the left balance chain that points downward. You might not be able to see it, but there's one on the top for the right balance chain that's upward. So pretty much you just got to align all of these, get it to go around the water pump. Water pump doesn't have a position for what needs to be timed just because it's fully balanced. Mostly just the balance shafts. I could actually remove them, and I thought about it, but it's just going to make a lot more vibration. So we're going to keep them in place for now. If I choose at a later time to remove them, I might, but I think this will be okay. So now we can get putting on our guides. So we got 3 guides. One's kind of the tensioner guide. Put the first one in place. Put the top one into place. You can kind of see that there's some protruding parts, and then there's recessed. The protrusions go against the block, and the recessed parts are actually where the bolt goes through. You can see it's actually got like a collar on these bolts, so they're kind of special. Then we got our tensioner guide. And then lastly, we got a tensioner. There's actually no gasket behind this tensioner. It's just a machined flat surface on the block and the tensioner itself. So it just goes into place. The last thing I still need to replace is this balance shaft oiler. And I'm going to just get everything down with my little electric impact. I'm just going to make sure everything's tight with a wrench. So now we're going to get on to the actual timing of this thing, but the first thing we need to do is put in our new rearward tensioner guide. Pretty much you can't put it in from the bottom, but it only really goes in one way, so you just get it to slide down towards the bottom, drop it in. Then we're going to take one of the longer 10mm bolts that comes in our kit and screw it into place in the bottom where we just were for how to do the balance shaft. Then we take I like to get everything in place around here because it's kind of difficult kind of doing this by yourself, because once again we got a chain with 3 marks on it. You got the exhaust cam mark, you got the intake cam mark, that's followed by these 2 yellow marks, and the crankcase mark. And how you can tell which actuator is which is actually, they're labeled for this year. You can see it says INT for intake, so that's going to be for this camshaft, that's our intake side. And for exhaust, we got EXH for exhaust, which is going to be on this side. As you can see, there's also a little notch right here, which correlates to this pin that our lines our actuator to our camshafts. So I try to get everything in place before I start actually putting it in place, just because it's a little difficult. We got our new tensioner. As you can see, it's not actually unlocked, so it's all the way in the fully depressed position. We'll keep this right by. And we got our 2 cam actuator bolts. So first thing we do, we got to drop this thing all the way down in there, get it around the crankshaft. Alright, got it on our crankshaft and our timing mark. Then I usually start with the rear one, which is our exhaust. I put it in the actual mark before I put it on the camshaft itself. Just slip it on loosely. It's actually not in the correct place. You'll see that here in a second. And I also get our intake one into place too. Everything's pretty much timed already, but now we need to actually get the camshaft to be aligned with the actuator. And once again, we're just going to be rotating the camshaft until we feel a click and it slides on just like that. Then we're going to move on to our intake one. Before I let all this go, I'm going to get my camshaft timing chain tensioner into place, which is just bolts in the back, just so it puts a little bit of tension on our chain so we don't slip anything while it's really loose. Just going to put that all the way in that I can with my fingers. And that should be pretty much held into place. Put these bolts in here loosely once again, and then double check our timing. Alright, so we're timed, and the crankshaft is also timed. Alright, so the last thing we need to do is put our upper guide into place, which looks like this. Just got a couple bolts held into place. Then we're going to snug down our timing chain tensioner, and then we're going to release it. And then tighten up our timing chain tensioner. So I had just mentioned about releasing the timing chain tensioner. So this thing's actually, it's a spring-loaded tensioner, but it's also got hydraulic pressure that'll run through it. So in the installation, the tensioner is in the locked position, and how you can unlock the tensioner is you pretty much just take a blunt object. I'm just going to use this ratchet just because it's got a blunt end. Put it against the timing chain where it's at the rear guide and just give it a little smack like that, and it'll unlock the mechanism inside the tensioner itself, and now it can actually tension the chain. And as you can see, we got pretty darn good tension on here, telling me that we're good to go. So now we're going to get to putting the valve cover on. Since we got everything timed, we don't really need to leave this off. It might make putting the turbocharger on a little bit easier, but I don't particularly want to risk dropping anything inside of there. So let's pretty much just go straight on, and then just bolt it back down. Alright, so now we're going to work on cleaning up the oil pan. One of the modifications we got to do on the back side, this is actually towards the back of the vehicle, about 1.5 or 1.75 inches down, I'm going to need to drill a hole. I think it's either here or here. That's pretty large. Before I'm going to do that, I'm just going to get a lot of this oil off of here and the sealant that's off of here, the RTV. So then I can clean it up, drill this out, then I'll have to clean it up again because there'll be a bunch of metal material in here. And then we can get to put this on with the oil drain bulkhead fitting in here. And then we can get started to put the turbocharger on. Alright, so we're back here with my oil pan, and so this is where I'm going to have to be drilling the hole for my oil return. So it's going to be 1.75 inches down in the middle of this section, which there, as you can see on the inside, there's really nothing behind it, so it's the perfect spot because can't really put it here, can't really put it here, not big enough. So this is the perfect spot. So all we're going to really do is take our square and kind of just, I guess we're going to have to eyeball it because it is, obviously not even. We're going to go 1/2, 1.75, and then we're going to do a 13/16 hole, which I don't have that size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a pilot hole, get it as large as I can with the bits that I have. Then I'm going to use a carbide bit to enlarge it. So I'm going to use the bulkhead fitting that I got with my kit, and pretty much just scratch or draw a circle around it in this place centered around that hole, and then just once again use the carbide bit to make the hole the size that I need it to be. So this is the bulkhead fitting that I got. So like I was saying before, I'm just going to look through it, center it on that hole, draw my circle around it, and we have approximately the right size what we're going to need. So I guess there's no turning back now, but here we go. So now that I got the large hole in place, I'm just going to choose one of my carbide bits since I'm just going into enlarging a hole. I don't really need it to be able to puncture anything. Put in the drill again. And start to enlarge this thing. Hey, here we go. That's all we need. Alright, time for more cleanup because this is a little bit of aluminum dust. Alright, so we're going to continue back on with installation of our bulkhead fitting. The first thing we got to do is put on our actual turbocharger drain pipe because this thing doesn't really have any swivel to it. So we'll need to put it in here so then we can get the correct angle, which is pretty much straight up and down. And then we can tighten this back up onto the oil pan. So first things first, I got some GM thread sealant. Also acts as a thread locker. So we're just going to put a decent amount on here. Then we're going to thread our bulkhead fitting on there. Maybe. Alright, it feels pretty darn tight. Then now we can put it in our oil pan. This thing does have a pretty good size O-ring on here, but I'm also going to put some thread locker on this thing just to be safe. Right now I want to take a minute to talk about turbochargers. I was first planning on going with the eBay Turbocharger Kit just because it looked fun, easy, and cheap, but I eventually decided to go with a slightly more expensive kit. What this turbocharger is actually a twin scroll turbocharger, exactly what you'd find on like a stock 2008 Cobalt SS with a turbocharger. The reason I went with that is because the eBay turbochargers aren't going to last nearly as long. They're only cooled by engine oil. This one actually has coolant feeds as well. And also this one, because it's a twin scroll, it's going to spool almost instantaneously, so I don't have any sort of lag. And it's just going to last longer. It's going to be a lot of fun, plenty of power for what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, let's get started with the installation of this thing. Alright, so now we're going to be putting this turbocharger in here. It's a lot easier to get it in from underneath, just because how this thing fits. So all there is that holds this on is 4 bolts. So we're just going to get it up in place. We already got the gasket on the exhaust manifold. Get these things started, tighten them up. Alright, now I'm going to double check everything's tight. Alright, I was having a little bit of trouble trying to fit my oil feed pipe in here. And that's because I was working with the wrong oil galley plug. So I put that back in, and I had to take the water outlet out for the coolant system to remove this other block plug, because you see there's 3 total. I wasn't exactly sure which one it was. So as you can see, it'll go up like this, and that'll bolt in right there. Everything should be nice, and I can put this back in once I get this thing bolted down. Alright. And we can put our outlet back on. And put our coolant sensor back in. Alright, now we're going to install the oil pan. I'm just going to use some of the GM RTV. Seal this thing up. I already got the gasket surface all cleaned up. So just going to lay down a thin bead, put this on the block, and then we'll be able to put all the other turbo hoses on. As you can see, I finally got all of my hoses routing. I got my oil feed, the returns on the bottom. This is the coolant return, and the feeds over there to the outlet. So I'm gonna finally be able to put my turbocharger extension on. Alright, next up we're going to be replacing some spark plugs. We got some new ones with the kit that are supposed to run the best with a turbocharged vehicle, so let's get that done. We'll put our intake manifold in next. Alright, the next thing we need to do is put our rail back into place, but before we can do that, we got to get some higher flowing injectors. These are some 60-pound injectors. That should be a direct replacement. We do have to reuse these outer sealing edges because these are actually what adapt the injector to fit into the Cobalt cylinder head. So pretty much these just pull off. They are pretty hard to get off just because they've been on here for so long. Then we got to remove these clips from each of these injectors, the electrical connectors, and these should also pull out of the rails. I'm gonna get like a hernia. Too tight. No, you don't want to do it? Alright. 2 for 4. Oh, okay. I swear I'm not this weak. These just are ridiculous. Jesus Christ. I can't get this. Alright, it's just that easy. Yeah. Oh, God. I really hope this is a lot easier than that last part. Oh, thank God. Alright, so before we install these, we're going to put a little bit of some spark plug dielectric grease supplied with my kit on the O-rings, so they just go in really easy. We don't cut any of the seals, and just for an easier installation. And there we are. So next up I gotta install this. This is gonna be the charged air duct. That's gonna go underneath this purge valve bracket. So we're gonna loosely install this right now too. We're just gonna get this started before we get everything in the way. We're just gonna leave it like that for now. Alright, we're actually getting pretty close to the end. I need to put the cradle in so then I can get the radiator and intercooler in and start doing the charged air ducting. So hopefully this doesn't give me too much trouble. Once again, I'm just doing it with a jack, so probably not going to be the most graceful thing. Alright, so this is one of the things I kind of figured I was going to run into. As you can see, that my front transmission mount is not really lined up with my cradle, which I kind of figured was going to happen. I already knew that all the other mounts were going to fit because I had it all together. But I never had a mount for the front with the manual transmission in it because, you know, I just didn't have it at the time. So unfortunately this doesn't fit. So I'm going to actually have to cut these brackets off right here, shift everything over, so then it will line up on this and I'm going to have to weld them back on. So that's probably going to be my next long project before I can really get on to the rest of my turbocharger build. Cradle installation take 2.